Good day, everyone. On behalf of Acting Director Tracy Troutman and the staff at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, let me welcome you to the webinar on police and community input regarding body-worn cameras. My name is Chip Coldren. I'm the Managing Director for Justice Programs at the CNA Institute for Public Research, the Director of Technical Assistance for the Bureau of Justice Assistance's Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program, and I will provide the introduction for today's webinar. We are pleased to have John Markovic with us today. John is the Senior Policy Advisor at BJA, working with us at CNA on the development and delivery of training and technical assistance regarding body-worn cameras. John, can you please offer a few words of welcome?
Yeah, thanks, Chip. First of all, I appreciate everyone joining us on the call and the efforts of CNA to put this together. Just by way of a little background, as Chip says, I'm a Senior Policy Analyst here at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and I'm also the Program Manager for the Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program. Just by way of a little background, the program began in fiscal year 2015, and in the fall of that year, we received 285 applications for the body-worn camera program from large, medium, and small agencies, as well as agencies looking to expand their body-worn camera program. And in the fall of that year, we awarded approximately $20 million to 73 agencies to implement the body-worn camera program, including the funding of approximately 21,000 cameras. Again, in fiscal year 2016, we ran the same grant program. We changed the stipulation in terms of the agency sizes a bit. We looked at very large, medium, and small agencies, and cumulatively in 2015 and 2016, we've now made awards to 179 agencies out of approximately 500 applications. And when all is said and done, we expect to have roughly 38,000 cameras funded through this project, but not only funding of the cameras, development of robust and comprehensive body-worn camera policies and implementation plans. Just as a final note, I want to let you know that we're now in the process of we've solicited funds for 2017, and we're looking for submissions from small, medium, and large agencies and very large agencies. In the small category, which is 25 or fewer sworn, we expect to make 40 awards for approximately $2 million, and those awards are capped at $50,000. In the medium-sized agencies, 26 to 250 sworn officers, we expect to make 10 awards for $4 million, and those awards will be capped at $400,000. In the large category, which is 251 to 1,000 sworn, we expect to make awards up to $250,000, and the total number of awards we expect to make is 8 awards for a total of $6 million. And finally, in the very large category, which is 1,000 or more sworn, we expect to make awards up to $1 million each, 5 awards at approximately $5 million. So for this year, the upcoming year, we expect to make $17 million in awards. And for those of you who are interested, the solicitation closes on February 16th. You can go to www.bja.gov/BWC for body-worn cameras, and you'll find information about the grant solicitation. With that, I'll hand it back to Chip. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Today's webinar focuses on one of the most important aspects of body-worn camera program implementation: how police and community input into program and policy development is and should be supported and ensured. This is extremely important for several reasons. First, in most instances, body-worn cameras are instituted to increase police transparency and engender increased community trust in the police department. With this purpose almost always at the forefront, it is counterintuitive to proceed with program implementation without encouragement and facilitation of public input. Second, Implementing body-worn cameras has ripple and downstream effects on almost every aspect of a police organization and throughout the local and regional justice system. It is imperative, then, to seek input from within the police agency and from peers and stakeholders throughout the system. And finally, successful implementation of a body-worn camera program depends on buy-in. Others not directly responsible for or involved in implementation need to understand the goals, objectives, policy issues, and benefits of a body-worn camera program, and they need to feel they had a part in defining them. If this occurs, your chances of success increase dramatically. Having said all that, the real important question is how. How can we make this buy-in happen? What specifically do we need to do if we embrace buy-in as a key goal for our body-worn camera program? Today's webinar is designed to address exactly that question. The technical assistance team members and site representatives we will hear from today include Hildy Sizo, a senior subject matter expert with the Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Project. Ms. Sizo will launch this webinar with a discussion of a new set of police community collaboration principles derived from a series of BJA-supported collaboration workshops held last year under the Smart Policing Initiative. Following Ms. Sizo, several body-worn camera site representatives will discuss their practical approaches to garnering police and community input regarding body-worn cameras. Captain Albert Handy of the Camden County, New Jersey Police Department. Camden received their body-worn camera funding in the recent FY 2016 cycle of awards. Major William Knott of the Dinwiddie County, Virginia Sheriff's Police Department, and Captain Eric Othas from the Beaverton, Oregon Police Department. Both of these agencies received their funding in the initial fiscal year 2015 award cycle. We thank today's presenters for contributing their time and sharing their experiences with us, and for working with us on putting this webinar together. This is one in a series of webinars sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and coordinated by CNA for the Body-Worn Camera Technical Assistance Program. We thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for its investment in the Body-Worn Camera Grant Program, in the Body-Worn Camera Toolkit, and in a range of technical assistance resources and opportunities for agencies implementing body-worn cameras. The Bureau supports state, county, local, tribal law enforcement agencies in many, many ways, and we are grateful that they do. Please permit me a few other comments. There will be opportunities for questions and participation toward the end of this webinar, so please make your thoughts and questions known. I can assure you that others will appreciate hearing what you have to say. Following the webinar, you will receive a request to evaluate it. Please complete the evaluation, and please give us your honest thoughts and recommendations. And please let us know what other topics you think we should cover in future webinars. Now let me also thank Dominique Burton and Denise Rodriguez at CNA, who do the background work to make sure these webinars go smoothly. Let's have Dominique go over a few technical details, then I'll say a few more words and turn the webinar over to Hildy. Dominique?
Thank you, Chip. Since this webinar is recorded for the benefit of others who may view it later on our website, please make sure to put your phones on mute by pressing *6 and to unmute by pressing #6. If you are having any technical difficulties, please message the host by using the utility function to the right of your screen, and we will try to help you to the best of our ability. If you don't get a chance to voice your comments or questions, please use the chat and we'll do our best to respond to your input. Yet if we are unable to do so, we ask that you please email your questions and comments to bwctta@cna.org so that we can get you the information needed. Chip?
Thank you, Dominique. So just a reminder about the schedule for today's webinar. We'll hear from next from Hildy on the police community collaboration principles. Then we'll hear from our body-worn camera sites. Then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers, and towards the end we'll make reference to several body-worn camera technical assistance resources that are available. So thank you everybody for joining today. We appreciate having your interest and attention. Let me now turn the presentation over to Ms. Sizo.
Thank you, Chip. I'm going to get control of these slides. There. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chip, for that introduction. My job is to lay the foundation for today's discussion. Now, there are many opportunities the body-worn camera program provides police agencies, and building police-community relationships by asking for input and seeking community buy-in is one of those. And as Chip mentioned, last year, CNA, in its capacity as the TTA provider for the Smart Policing Initiative, organized 3 regional workshops to explore ways in which police and community actually interact and how to move toward greater collaboration. Now, both police managers and community members, as well as partners from BJA and the COPS office, attended these 3 regional workshops, and they offered up a host of learnings that I wanted to share with you now. So let's start by looking at the various ways in which police and communities interact. Now, if you think of community interaction as a continuum, then community outreach, which you see here on the screen on the far left of the continuum, is the least complex form. It focuses on information sharing and communication with the public, but it primarily involves one-way, all police-driven communication. Press releases are a good example. Now, consultation is further down the continuum, and it involves not only information sharing, but also stakeholder input and buy-in. Now, town hall forums and community meetings are good examples of these activities. Coordination goes further down that continuum. It involves agencies or organizations working together to share information and resources. And good examples are task forces and steering committees. Now, collaborative partnerships go much further. They bring together both law enforcement agencies and community members to actually solve community problems by sharing responsibilities, resources, and decision-making. And the power of collaboration is in the sharing and the inclusion of stakeholders. So as you design your community input process for body-worn cameras, you should consider incorporating many of these elements from all the communication processes on this continuum. So what we heard most from participants of last year's workshops was that no practice is more vital to policing than the building of positive relationships with community members and stakeholders. And in order to build and support these positive relationships, there are certain skills and certain actions that officers should be embracing. These are having frequent face-to-face contact with community members and stakeholders, learning to be really good communicators. Now, this skill, to be a good communicator, does not always come natural to people. So departments that offer training and offer various tools to help officers become good communicators and to communicate effectively may be very, very critical. Another important area is being a good listener, not just a one-way communicator, but a two-way communicator and being a good listener. And also engaging people in an honest, caring, and empathetic manner. One thing we heard at these workshops over and over again was just how important it is for officers to show the community that they care. Now, these are the cornerstones to building positive relations and ought to be incorporated into your various community input activities. Also, what we heard at the workshops was the need for agencies to systematically and strategically reach out and build positive relationships with diverse communities. Now, to do this, agencies must first consider who comprises the community that they're serving and who specifically has a stake in the issue at hand. So in terms of body-worn cameras, agencies should be as inclusive as possible And you ought to consider including perhaps some of the following groups I'm going to mention here in your consultation activities. First of all, members of your own department to get officer buy-in, such as the people from IT, from internal affairs and training, from your unions. Also, peer agencies or other police departments who are further along in the body-worn camera process, and you can learn from their experiences. Criminal justice officials, such as your local prosecutors and court officials who will be consumers of the body-worn camera video. Also, your local decision makers, such as city council members and city attorneys who oversee funding and policy for the program. Certainly, your community leaders and organizations. And they should really include both your supporters as well as possible detractors or skeptics of this program. For example, your local NAACP chapter, representatives from civil liberty groups, faith-based groups, and local neighborhood associations. And finally, there's many stakeholder groups, particularly those who may have special concerns or sensitivities with officers wearing cameras, particularly people who deal with vulnerable populations, such as managers of mental health facilities, hospitals, and schools. All of these, there's a diverse list of groups that you ought to consider in your consultation activities. Now, we also heard at the workshops that communication and media strategies can be powerful tools for promoting community interaction and for highlighting positive actions and even improving transparency. So often we're hearing from agencies about the negative stories that they receive in the local press. Well, body-worn cameras provide a great opportunity for agencies to actually be proactive and to design some communication strategies that get those positive stories into the community. So the more that your agency informs the community, consults with the community, educates the community, the more collaborative your agency will be viewed. And that will all contribute to a community-friendly organizational brand. Now, you can use traditional communication channels to accomplish this, things like press releases, press conferences, billboards, flyers, etc. But this is also a great time to harness the power of social media, where you can control the accuracy of the information and even answer questions in dialogue with community members while you're doing it. Body-worn cameras provide an opportunity for you to put out those stories of individual officers who are wearing the cameras and interacting successfully with community members. So you can see up here on the screen, I've got a couple of pictures that illustrate how the Kansas City Police Department really values its officers interacting with community members, and they're actually putting visual video of this interaction online. You can see an officer dancing with young people on the street. They put it up online, and they got over 3.3 million views. Also a police flash mob that got millions of views as well. So they're really building a positive image and building a following in their community, and a positive one at that. Another area we heard from workshop participants was how important it is for police to understand the community's perspective on these important issues like body-worn cameras. And in many instances, the community's perspective may differ from the department's perspective. In other words, we need to give the community a voice so that we can understand their priorities and their perspective. And this will help us build trust and confidence in our police officers. Now, there are many ways to do this, particularly when it comes to the body-worn camera program. So you can consider organizing focus groups, town hall sessions, individual meetings with stakeholders, attending existing community meetings, sending out emails, holding these social media dialogues, and there's others. And don't forget that once you ask people for input, you need to report back to them how you use that input. People need to know that you considered their input that they gave you, and even if you don't use it or you don't use all of it, they just simply need to understand why and be recognized. So with that, it's now time to hear from some individual agencies about their experiences and how they integrated some of these principles into their body-worn camera outreach. So I will turn it over to our next speaker.
Thank you, Hildy. This is Captain Handy. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity for sharing the experiences and successes we at the Camden County Police Department encountered with regard to police community involvement in our body-worn camera program. We began the process of implementation of our body-worn camera program in 2015. Before that, we engaged in a great deal of research and testing and evaluation of several different devices. One of the first things we did was to review and discuss the publication implementing a body-worn camera program, recommendations and lessons learned. This was prepared by the COPS office and PERF. Our assistant chief at the time actually assisted in the discussion and development of that. It's available online. We found it very useful, and you'll find it speaks specifically to community involvement in the process, particularly with regard to impact on community relationships, securing community support, and addressing officer concerns. We formed our policy group, which is made up of representation from all commands, operations, investigations, professional standards, as well as union representation and the like, and developed a draft or temporary policy based on best practices. We include elements from our model policies that we felt would meet our expectations and needs of our program. The policy was used during a pilot program where 18 officers were trained in a temporary policy and began wearing the cameras during the tour of duty. During this process, we wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for community input and that the policy reflected the concerns and interests of our community. In furtherance of that, we formed a partnership with New York University School of Law, the renowned Dr. Barry Friedman of the Policing Project and his team. They were an outstanding partner in this process, and together we developed a comprehensive process for the collection and analysis of feedback from the community on our body-worn camera policy. An important component of this process was that there were multiple opportunities for participation and that we were engaging all or as many of the facets of the community we could. We didn't want to just capture the feedback of a few community leaders or a local community group. We wanted any individual, whether affiliated with an organized group or not, as well as those from our business community and certainly any organized groups, to be able to be informed and have an opportunity to weigh in. One of the first things we did was post a temporary policy on our website and share it on social media. Anyone could go on the site, click the link, and read the policy. We also linked a portal where anyone could post a comment and provide feedback. And we received some very good feedback through this method on behalf of organized groups such as the ACLU, the local chapter of the NAACP, and an affiliate of the Institute of Social Justice were among the respondents. We also developed a survey. There were 11 specific questions relating to specific policy components, and the questions touched on a wide range of policy areas, such as whether an officer should inform a citizen that they're recording while out in public place, or whether they would feel comfortable reporting a crime to an officer wearing a body camera. The online survey was available on our website, as well as hard copy versions were distributed at community meetings and public forums. So once we had the mechanisms in place for the organized collection of feedback, we expanded the process and communicated the program in a number of public forums where we sought feedback on the policy. Naturally, this was coordinated with our mayor's office, and the mayor and chief of police, together with Dr. Friedman and his team, organized and held 2 community meetings that were organized and advertised specifically for the review of body-worn camera program. These meetings were open to anyone and was an open forum. Folks could ask questions, provide comments, and copies of the policy were handed out, as well as copies of the surveys. Beyond that, we visited several established community group meetings. The mayor's office leads 2 large community groups here in Camden, the Community Congress and a coalition of faith-based organizations from across the city. So we provided presentations to those groups, answered questions, and collected feedback from them as well. Beyond that, our district commanders attend many smaller community groups within their districts, and the details of the program were shared at those venues. And we also met and detailed the program with our city council and Corporate Watch, which is a collaborative forum of business entities and corporations here in the city of Camden. It was important for us to evaluate the temporary policy and get feedback from other groups as well, in particular officers that were wearing the devices as part of our pilot program. They were an important part of the process and provided critical feedback to the program and policy effectiveness. We gathered input from our officers in two ways. First, we formed a focus group of officers that met with and were interviewed by the NYU team. They provided input on their perspectives and the camera policy as it impacted their day-to-day performance. But we also held weekly meetings with our implementation team. And each week we invited 3 different officers and dedicated a portion of the meeting to getting feedback on functionality of the device and policy components. We soon realized a common theme amongst the officers' feedback, and that was that the camera, by its mere presence, produced more civil and cooperative interactions, particularly during stops. Once individuals were aware that the officer had a camera, attitude and demeanor changed, and stops and interactions took place without any issues. It even served to de-escalate situations where individuals were argumentative or confrontational, yet immediately curb their behavior once they're aware that the officer was wearing a camera. So in regards to the cameras, they were widely supported by officers in the program. Now, what we came to realize is that officers in the field, they would get feedback through their day-to-day interactions in the field. Usually this was just a passing conversation where someone would ask about the camera, make a comment, usually in support of wearing the cameras. And we didn't realize at first that this was an excellent opportunity to capture feedback. This was discussed at our weekly meetings with the officers, but in a general perception sense. So one of our takeaways from this would be that we want to share is to use the officers in the field during your pilot program as agents for participation in your online survey. Our officers were aware of the NYU team and survey, but we didn't give them specific direction in regard. We feel that we could have expanded our outreach effort and participation in the survey from the community, and it would have been as simple as just giving some direction for folks to go on the website and complete the survey. So beyond the input from the community and officers, we also met with our partners in law enforcement community. We met with the prosecutor's office, for example, to discuss our program and identify areas of concern, such as retention, access, and the like, which help shape our final revisions of our policy in those areas. We also met with our municipal court prosecutors and reviewed the program and policy in respect to their needs. While these groups didn't participate in the formal NYU survey, they did provide valuable insight on certain policy areas that need to be considered. Now, if you were to ask me which of the formats we utilized, the online survey, the public forums, or the website portal was more valuable, or where we got the most information, I'd have to say that all 3 were equally important and provided valuable information, and here's why. We received valuable information from the comment portal because those that seemed most interested in the issue of body cameras sought this out and were able to provide detailed requests and explanation. While the survey had certain specific questions that were asked, and we received a larger number of responses which we were able to measure and gauge perceptions. And the public forums were valuable because they enabled face-to-face contact, and this is where issues could be explained and questions asked, and those attending were able to gain a deeper understanding of the policy, and we were able to gain a deeper understanding of the concerns or attitudes towards certain aspects of the policy. So once NYU had all the data from the online surveys in the portal, we received 220 surveys and a series of written comments from the portal. The team organized the data, which is a crucial component, organizing all that data into a meaningful document that broke everything down and can be reviewed with our implementation team. So after reviewing the feedback, many policy areas were amended to reflect the concerns voiced by the community. To name a few, we changed our policy to record all calls for service. In the temporary policy, we recorded only calls for service that would include a crime or arrest. However, we changed that to record all calls for service and all interactions with the community for a law enforcement purpose. We also amended our policy to include a provision for the retention of recordings upon written request. And we also amended to allow viewing of certain videos by potential complainants under certain circumstances, to name a few. So after the amendments were made, we issued the policy within the department. We replaced the policy on the website along with the final report that was produced by NYU. We then moved forward with the training and full deployment of our cameras to the department. We utilized officers that participated in the pilot program to assist with the training, and this was key because they were able to reinforce the policy areas excuse me, with examples and situations they encountered, which helped greatly. They were able to provide experiences and better explanation of the different policy elements, and that worked towards gaining support from the other officers being outfitted with the cameras. So at this time, we currently have 322 cameras deployed, and our participation with studies and evaluation is ongoing. We are currently participating in a separate evaluation study with Rutgers University here in New Jersey, with the distinguished professor Milton Human and his team in a study on officer attitudes and perceptions of body-worn cameras. So based on our experiences and assessment of what worked well for us, we would like to share some recommendations we feel may be helpful. First, partner with an independent entity, such as a university. A university or college is an excellent choice. They are likely neutral on the issues, experience in research. They're academics, usually smart and professional, and often have programs looking for opportunities for projects such as these. Next, we suggest using multiple methods of communicating, your website, social media networks, but also get face-to-face with folks where you can explain and answer questions and ask questions of the community. We also would recommend performing outreach to all facets of your community, whether affiliated with an established group or not to forget your business, your law enforcement community, and religious community. We feel that developing a process or mechanism for the collection of the feedback was absolutely essential. For us, it was the survey, and enabled us to organize the data for a meaningful review. And lastly, implement the recommendations where possible. You won't be able to incorporate every suggestion or concern you receive, but if you accept reasonable considerations and honestly report back on what amendments you were able to make or didn't make and why, you'll gain a great deal of trust and transparency. We feel that this is one of the core components of police-community relations, but it's also one of the main purposes for your body-worn camera program to start with. So I have my name and contact information up for you here. It'll be my pleasure to help with any other questions or components of your camera that you feel you should send our way. With that, I would like to thank you for the opportunity, and I'll now turn it over to Major William Nutt.
Thank you, Captain Handy. I appreciate the your information, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the webinar this evening. I want to welcome everybody. First of all, I want to just give a little bit of information about Dinwiddie County. We're the smallest agency that's presenting today. We have a uniform division of 20 deputies. Dinwiddie County is approximately 507 square miles and is mainly a rural community. The sheriff is elected by the citizens, and therefore transparency is an important thing with us. It was important prior to the body-worn camera program, and that just enhanced our ability to be transparent to the community. We received our funding in 2015. We got our cameras deployed in August of 2016. With our grant funding, we purchased 25 cameras. Once we got the funding, we began trying to develop a policy, and we kind of realized early on that there was no need to recreate the wheel. We reached out to a number of agencies across the country and got sample policies from them. And I would encourage you, especially into the smaller agencies that are in the policy development process now, reach out to these agencies. Everybody was more than gracious to share their policies with us. We kind of went through those, saw things, talked to agencies, found out what worked for them, what didn't, what they had included in their policies, and why they had included that in their policies. We consulted with our prosecutor's office, the Commonwealth Attorney's office, as well as the Dinwiddie County Attorney, looking at any legal and liability concerns that may arise with a body-worn camera program. Once we got a draft policy, we posted it online to the Dinwiddie County webpage. We made the community aware that we had received this grant funding and were planning on developing a body-worn camera program. We publicized that through print media. We have two local papers. One is a daily paper, one is a weekly paper that's just in the county. And we found that was a good way to get the word out. Social media was also another an option. And with those different media outlets, we were able to get the word out to the community that we were planning this, and ask for feedback on the policy. Asked people to download it. We made it available to them. We passed it out at our town hall meeting and encouraged feedback from the community. We just prior to on into this, we conducted a town hall meeting to discuss the program. We had the cameras there, and by that point, we had selected a vendor. We had cameras there for them to look at, to show how they worked, to give it, even did some sample videos to show them what the camera saw and what it didn't see, to make sure that they understood all of that. We went to a number of the special interest groups in the community and asking for feedback specifically. Faith-based groups are very active here in Dinwiddie County, and you have to include them, or we did on our end, had to include them in this and ask for feedback from them. We went to our neighborhood watch groups. We went to our civic organizations. The Ruitons are very big in our county. We presented it to them, told them what we were doing. We also presented to the local NAACP. We actually had a separate meeting. We invited them to the town hall meeting, which was open to the public, and then had a separate meeting with them to kind of go over the policies and how the cameras were going to be used and what we were looking to gather from this in being more transparent department. A couple things that we came from the feedback that we got, and it was kind of unique to Dinwiddie County. One, Dinwiddie County is home to a state mental health facility. It's the largest one in the state of Virginia, and we respond there for calls for service. And that facility and the residents and patients there present a unique set of circumstances for us and challenges when we respond. This is just kind of added to when we added the body camera program. How was that going to be used? The administration and staff there had questions about that. It also, out of the town hall meeting, concerns were expressed over innocent bystanders and people who may be at a scene or where a deputy may go, and how the video evidence would be used if it was released to the media in court proceedings or whatnot. How would children, innocent bystanders, stuff be handled? With the vendor that we selected for ours in the evidence storage software that we used are using, it has a redaction tool, and the redaction process of managing this evidence became a concern and created some discussion, and we were able to address that with this software, and it seems to have answered those questions, and the public seems to be good with that. It also became a concern with our school resource officers. When we deployed these cameras, we have three schools we have resource officers in: a high school, a middle school, and one of our elementary schools. And it was a question as to, how is this going to be used in the schools? We had some concerns from the school administration, from some parents, expressed some concerns about that. And so we've had to address that specifically with our resource officers, how they're going to use those cameras during the course of interacting with the students and in the school days and all that. Once we got this, and as we've moved on into deploying our body-worn camera program, like I said, we deployed in August of 2016. The 20 patrol deputies, the 3 school resource officers, all have the cameras and are expected to use them. But we found that the policy is a work in progress. It's a living document, is moving on, and we've had to adjust and add to it as we've gone along as circumstances have come to light to us. It's been well received by the deputies and the public alike. We're very fortunate here in Dinwiddie County. We do have a good working relationship with the community. The community as a whole is very supportive of our department, of the sheriff, and we appreciate that. And this body-worn camera program has only seemed to enhance that with the community. But as we continue on, we know that we'll continue to run into things that we will have to address so we don't think about this. It's obvious that you're not going to think of everything, and that you're going to have to continue to work your policy and come across things as you move along and as you get into the program. I've included my contact information here for you. It's available, and more than happy to offer any of our information that we can to help you, especially to the smaller agencies. Again, we were one of the smaller ones that did receive the grant funding, and we were very fortunate and pleased to have received that, and very pleased that this process of getting the policy in place and getting these cameras deployed has been a pretty smooth transition for us. And so I'm available at any time. Be more than happy to help any kind of way I can, and share with you kind of what we went through to get this in place. And with that, I pass it on to Eric Othis, our next presenter.
Thank you, Major Knott, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. Just a little bit of information for those of you that are listening on the city of Beaverton. We are located in Oregon, just a suburb of Portland, Oregon. We are approximately 98,000 residents with 137 sworn personnel. As was said earlier, we did receive our grant September of 15. We finally signed our contracts with the vendor that was chosen in December of 16, and we're looking for implementation of approximately 100 cameras in March of this year coming up. During the process, we had a project team that was put together, and it was mentioned before. We used a wide range of people throughout the city and within our department. We had 2 sergeants, we had 8 patrol officers, whether it was patrol or SROs. They worked all as the same team. We had a couple people from our IT department. We had our records manager, our grant manager, and then myself was the implementation team. In Beaverton, we're lucky that community policing is entrenched as a concept within the police department. We have really good community involvement. We attend a lot of different city events. We host a lot of stuff from shredding events, child safety seats, all types of activities that we have built in where we interact with the community on a regular basis. And through that, we have very strong partnerships with a variety of different groups that we reached out to during this process to help us develop the policy. Our strategy from the beginning was to be involved and involve all the stakeholders in the development of our program and our policy. And we wanted to make sure that we had the good communication with our city leaders. We knew that was going to be essential. So during the process, as we conducted our outreach and we engaged with our community, we used a variety of different methods to get the word out. We used the city newsletter, we used social media, we also used press releases. During the press releases, we were fortunate to have a couple of the news agencies be very interested in it and actually attended a few of our open houses that I'll talk about a little bit later, and actually ran really positive stories about the concept and the idea of bringing a body-worn camera program to Beaverton. We made a number of presentations at our city council. We made 3 public presentations, one obviously as we accepted the grant, one partway through, and then one right before the council agreed and finalized the contract with the vendor that we selected. In that, we also knew that we needed to have one-on-one discussions with our counselors. We knew that we needed to answer all of their questions and made sure that we covered whatever they needed covered for their constituents in our presentations to the public presentations for City Council. As I mentioned just a minute ago, we did have 2 open houses in January and February of last year, and this was a good opportunity for us to interact with the community. We used all of the social media, press release, all that type of information to get the word out. We did a couple things in the open houses where we felt it was interesting. We actually put together what's called a DOT survey, where we had 15 or 20 just general questions that started with something like body-worn cameras make Beaverton a safer community, strengthen community police relationships, affect my privacy. So we had some good statements out there, and what we did was we just asked the people that attended to take and put a red dot if they agreed with the statement, or a black dot if they didn't agree with the statement. And that way, people, if they really didn't want to interact and didn't have specific questions, we could still get their feedback on specific topics and specific questions relating to our policy and the implementation of the program. We also left open flip charts so that the citizens would be able to just write their opinions and write their own questions. We then used those questions to develop frequently asked questions, which we posted on the department webpage for others who were not able to make it into the open houses, so that they had an opportunity to see what questions were being asked and what our agency and city response to those questions were. We also were fortunate enough to have our traffic officers wearing a body-worn camera at the time. It was kind of the baby implementation stage, kind of the foot into the water to test it kind of a theory. And they were able to use those cameras in live demonstration so people could see what and how the cameras worked and how the officers were able to use them. As I had said, we used the frequently asked questions. We posted those on the department's webpage that was open to the public, and we also created talking points for our officers who were not part of the implementation team, but so that they knew how to respond to general questions the public might have and where we were headed with the program and the policy. And they used these for their ability later on, as you see farther down the neighborhood association meetings. They use those to use as talking points for them. One of the things we did is we did over 15 presentations to the general public, different groups. If they would call and ask, we would be there. We also reached out to several different community groups to make presentations to them. A few of them were like the Rotary Club for the City of Beaverton. We reached out to the Human Rights Advisory Committee and made a presentation to them and answered their questions. We did one at a retirement home to get the opinions and thoughts of the seniors in our community. And we reached out to Intel, which is in a city nearby, but they have a lot of people that live within our community. We wanted to know what they were thinking, those their employees were thinking. And we reached out to the Mayor's Youth Advisory Board to get an impression and an idea of what the younger kids in our community were feeling. It was really interesting when we did the Intel presentation. Obviously, Intel's a very large corporation, so you anticipate fairly good questions and some well thought out questions. And what I was really surprised about, which was really cool, was even though we went to the Mayor's Youth Advisory Board and you're talking about 15, 16, 17-year-old kids in high school, a lot of their questions were very similar to the questions that the employees from Intel brought up about privacy concerns, the officers being able to stop the cameras, those type of things. So it was really good to get the input of the younger kids and see what thought process they had as well. Our SROs will also be wearing cameras, and they did. We had one SRO that was part of our test group, and she ended up getting information from the staff at the schools and dealing with the school administration, and it was a positive thing. The school, at least our school district, is very supportive of us wearing our cameras and doing what we need to do within the schools. Obviously, all of this was help for us to develop our policy. You know, besides the officer involvement with the working group, we reached out to our victim services providers that we work with on a daily basis. We reached out to our district attorney, and we also reached out to our municipal attorneys to get their input and their ideas. We reached out to the records manager and made sure that she was involved so that we would make sure that redaction, make sure that records retention, all those type of things were addressed within our policy. And we also made sure that our police union was involved. We knew that if we didn't get input and feedback from them early on, that it would be a very hard uphill battle for us to implement the cameras. They were very supportive, and they liked the idea of having their officers or our officers wear cameras, not only to protect themselves but also the public. And one of the things we did is we did a couple online surveys. We did a community survey and we did officer surveys. We did 2 surveys with the department members. We did one as we accepted the process or accepted the grant, and then we did one just before the final meeting last December, and you can see the stats right there on the screen as far as the questions we asked. We did ask a number of questions. We asked 11 actually, and so there's only 4 of them right there. It's not that any of the questions or their answers were bad. It was just we had to narrow it down so we didn't bore you with statistics on the webinar. And we also did one community survey where we ended up getting 1,100 respondents. We used the Facebook, web page, all that kind of stuff to advertise the community survey, and those are the responses we got, which was pretty good. The community support is there, and I don't think they expect too much from the system as far as being the cure-all for everything that's going on. One of the things we found as most beneficial to us in the community collaboration and discussion was working with the presentations, whether it was the community presentations, the open houses, or at our NAC meetings with our officers. We found that the face-to-face communication was great because it was a two-way discussion. You were able to understand what their fears were, what their hesitations were, and you were able to explain a little bit more than just a flyer or something posted on the internet where it's just a one-way conversation. So for us, the most beneficial was all the community involvement and the face-to-face conversations. So part of what we did is we made sure we reached out to all the stakeholders that we had involvement with and made sure we got input not only on the program but on the policy development. In each of the different categories listed below, the mayor and city council, they all have their own individual philosophies, their own individual ideas, and their own concerns. And they also want to make sure that what they're doing fits the community and answers the community's questions. So we had to make sure that we answered those questions, and that was why we ended up having to go back to City Council 3 times to make sure that all the questions were answered and that they felt comfortable that their constituents and the people that they represent felt like they were being included in the process. We also worked with our victim services providers, and from them what we learned is a lot of privacy concerns and sensitivity. As we know in law enforcement, you end up working with some very sensitive situations that recording may cause a victim or a person involved to not necessarily want to talk about it. So there was some communication there, and that helped us generate a better policy, in my opinion. We also use law enforcement agencies and the Police Chiefs Association of Oregon. We use the best practices. We also were fortunate enough for other agencies to see their policies and be able to adapt maybe what they had or a good part in their policy to something that we were able to implement into ours. As I had said before, we did reach out to our district attorney, the prosecutor, and our city attorney, and we coordinated with them what they thought would be important as far as evidence sharing and release of information and that type of stuff within the policy. One of the big topics that we ended up having the discussion with them was the officer-involved shooting topic and what and how an officer would view or would not be able to view that before a interview. And that was critical to make sure that we had the district attorney and our union together on that. As I said, the school district, we reached out to them. They're a great partner with us, and although they did have some concerns about officers wearing cameras in the schools, they understand our process. We have 4 major high schools. Each one of the high schools has an SRO in them, and then we have 2 that work in some of the middle schools, and they understand the reason why our officers are wearing them and are supportive of it and are okay with us using them in the schools. We also wanted to make sure that we had federal and state laws covered. We're fortunate in the state of Oregon that the legislation got ahead of the curve on body-worn cameras, and in 2015 they passed a House bill that is kind of our state law that dictates many different things on making sure that we notify the general public as we're talking, and all those things were good to be able to include into our policy. So some of the lessons learned that I can suggest and hopefully help some of you not have to deal with or at least plan for is make sure you definitely get the good community stakeholders that you deal with on an everyday basis. By reaching out and talking to them, we learned a lot of different stuff that was valuable for our policy. As in law enforcement, we'd like to be able to create a policy and think we've kind of thought of everything, but until you include everybody else that looks at what we do at a little bit different angle, it helps make sure that you cover those areas. And that's where we learned that our policy is a living document and that it will continue to be a living document with every case, every day, every opportunity that we have using the cameras. We will have to adjust and move our policy based on experiences we have. We knew that collaborating on the front end would help us reduce work later on, and that's where we included our IT department, our finance department, and our union early in this whole discussion way back in October of 15 when we got the grant. We knew it was coming. We started reaching out and doing that communication at that point. And obviously, as I've said before, we don't know everything. We need to be receptive and be open to other people's input. It was real important to find out how many people were concerned about us recording in their residence, but yet they don't care if I come into their residence. And so, you know, you ended up having to kind of work around that and work with the idea and the concept of how do you deal with their privacy concern, but yet still be able to do your job effectively. The district attorney's office, obviously, as I said before, have some strong interests and concerns for release of information, for sharing of the evidence with the defense attorneys, and so we wanted to make sure that they were involved. We also found that the BJA body-worn camera toolkit was a valuable resource, and it helped us guide us through the process. And last but not least, we wanted to make sure that we were transparent to not only our officers, but also the community in the development of our policy and the body-worn camera program. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Sizo.
Well, this is John Markvick. Let me jump in here since we're short on time. First of all, I want to thank our presenters, our law enforcement executives from Camden, from Dinwiddie, and from Beaverton for very dynamic and informative presentations. And clearly, I also want to thank the CNA team for arranging yet another informative and well-thought-out webinar that educates the law enforcement community and its partners on how to work collaboratively to implement a successful body-worn camera program. So as was evident, I think, in the presenter's remarks, there's a very clear process to implementing body-worn cameras that, when done right, can reap benefits for the police agency and the community alike. That said, while there are core elements to successfully implement these body-worn cameras, there is no paint-by-numbers or one-size-fits-all approach to implementation. As we saw in the three presentations from very distinct and diverse agencies, there will be a considerable amount of adaptation that's necessary at the local level in your individual jurisdictions. But I think what should be common across all sites is a commitment to core principles: inclusion, genuine collaboration, openness or transparency, and collaboration with your community. So with the help of CNA and its partners, BJA feels very privileged to help support what I think is a burgeoning community of practice organized around these elements. And so I invite you to visit the participants of the webinar to visit the Body-Worn Camera Toolkit website again at www.bja.gov/BWC for body-worn cameras. Thanks all, and I'll turn it over to CNA for closing remarks and hopefully a few questions.
Dominique, do we have time for questions?
Yes. Chip has a few, so I know he's going to go ahead and start them off. Chip, can you hear me?
Oh, it'd be nice if I took my mute off, wouldn't it? Sorry about that. We've had a couple questions submitted in advance of the webinar, so I'm going to just take a minute or two to raise those questions and actually ask our presenters to maybe handle one or two of those. If anybody wants to make a question, a comment or ask a question, I encourage you to use the chat facility now, and we'll tend to that question as best as we can. And then I think I'll turn it back over to Hildy for like a public service announcement. So one question we had from a participant from San Antonio that I'd like our presenter to consider is a very basic one. It simply states, has the program been a benefit for citizens and officers? And if so, how? So let me ask Albert Handy first, if he wants to just say a few words about that, about if you're observing benefits for citizens and officers alike.
Yeah, as I mentioned during my presentation, we certainly are seeing benefits from our citizens and from the officers alike. I did mention that interactions, particularly with regards to stops, they're very civilized, non-confrontational. So in that regard, we've seen some benefits. But beyond that, I think that we are experiencing some great benefits as far as trust and transparency with the community. This process has been a vehicle for us to really engage and discuss and implement a program in partnership with the community. So we feel we've greatly benefited the community and the police officers alike.
Thank you, Albert. Major Knott?
Yeah, and it has for us as well on several levels. One, obviously, like Captain Handy said, the traffic stops. You see that the violator is stopped, or the person that they're encountering is aware of the camera, and the stops seem to be more civilized. Not a lot of yelling and screaming back and forth. They realize that they're being videotaped. The second is with working with Forest Sheriff. Our sheriff in particular makes himself very accessible to the public, and therefore gets a number of calls about a complaint, a situation, or something that's come up with a deputy, and he would be put in a position where, was he taking the deputy side, was he taking the citizen side, what actually happened. The thing that we're finding now is we're able to go back and pull up these interactions on the body camera, review the footage, and it's answering the question. And the deputies have been very receptive to it. We're very excited to get it, and are continuing their enthusiasm with it since we've deployed.
Thank you, sir. Eric, you want to comment at all?
I think our results are going to be very similar. Obviously, we have not rolled our camera out to all the agency, but I know during the testing process that the body-worn camera test group would talk about if another officer who was not wearing a body-worn camera was out with a unruly or a difficult person that they're dealing with out on the street, when they would show up and they would make the announcement that they're using the body-worn camera and they're recording the event, they made comment that many times the unruly person would kind of lower their voice, they'd stop arguing, and they'd be a little bit more reasonable to deal with. So it only happened a few times, but we only tested cameras off and on for about 2 months, so not a real good group to choose from, but even the 2 or 3 instances that we had would obviously help, one, the agency, because if those obviously turn into sometimes use of force incidences and complaints, that it also helps the community because the use of force wasn't used. They were able to lower their demeanor and was able to resolve the situation much easier.
Thank you, sir. There's another question from our colleagues out in Las Vegas, and I think it's actually a very timely one. And again, I'll ask each of our presenters to comment on this if they can. But the question has to do with auditing and compliance, and how are each of the agencies handling the the management of this issue. So I'm going to go back to Albert. Please, can you just talk for a few minutes about auditing and compliance in your program?
Yeah, we have an auditing process. We have an auditing team where we audit. There's two methods that we utilize. We use supervisor audits. So every supervisor audits 20% of the officers under their commands videos, and then we have a separate auditing team that does independent audits, independent of that. And the main things that we look at is, looking for compliance, professionalism. We have a CERMAM culture here, so we're looking to make sure that a lot of the edicts and the training for professionalism and demeanor are transcending, the roll calls in the classroom and into the field. So we're looking for quality with professionalism with our officers, but also looking for compliance to our policy as far as activation, deactivation, and things of that nature.
Thank you. Major Knott?
Yes, and that's with a smaller agency as we are. We have had the supervisors who supervise on the shifts do a lot of the auditing, along with the command staff. We will go in and review and make sure that they're following policy, doing the proper things with the use of the video. Also, our evidence manager is a part of that process, and he does that as well. So again, not on as big a basis, but we're still getting quite a bit of video stored in our storage software, and I can see as time progresses, and if this expands, we may have to look at additional manpower to help do this audit.
Thank you. Eric, any comment on this question?
Well, very similar. We are set up to have supervisors do audits of their employees or their officers working their shifts. We don't have a set standard for them. It's just one of the expected things that the supervisor is going to do. We also have a person that we've added some responsibility onto her role within the agency, that she will go in and make sure that the compliance part is there, that the officers are tagging them correctly, that they're for retention, that the case numbers and all that type of stuff are assigned to the videos, so we don't have videos that are out there that are untagged and unmarked. So we're using some existing personnel. Once it rolls out and is fully implemented, we will have to probably reevaluate it and see if we're doing enough, and if the one person that we have that's going to be assigned to do the auditing part of it is able to keep up.
Okay, thank you all very much. I'd like to, if you'll indulge me for half a minute, I want to ask our colleague from New Jersey two questions. One, I'm curious about the change from filming only a certain type of call for service to going to all calls for service. What prompted that change in your policy?
Well, it was feedback that we received during the community input process. Under our temporary policy, concerns of retention and things of that nature, storage, and we handle significant calls for service here in the city of Camden. So recording all calls was a concern for us initially. We found some solutions there based on the community feedback. We changed that so all interactions, all calls for service, but also all interactions for a law enforcement purpose are recorded.
Good. Thank you very much. And did NYU, did they do this as a matter of public service from the university, or was there a cost involved in their involvement?
I believe it was all pro bono. So I don't know if any funds that were expended on their end. I can't really speak to that. But it was more of a partnership between us and NYU. You'll find that, with NYU, the policing project there, part of their mission is kind of collaborating with law enforcement on issues such as these that affect communities and police-community relations. But it's my understanding that it was all pro bono and more of a partnership.
Thank you very much, sir. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us today and for working with us on this webinar. I know Hildy has a few things that she'd like to say as we close up. Hildy?
Okay, thanks, Chip. I hope that all of you found this discussion of community input processes helpful. And if you'd like to learn more about it, there are several things you can look into. The Smart Policing Initiative has put a publication together based on those 3 regional workshops that I mentioned that were put on last year. And we put our lessons learned into this document called Smart Policing Collaboration Principles. And they are available online, and I've provided the link up here on your screen. If you would like to go, it's a very short document, but I think very impactful if you'd like to take a look. Also, next month on February 22nd, the Smart Policing Initiative is holding a webinar specifically on the benefits of collaborative policing. And we'll be exploring in much more depth these collaboration principles that are in this document I just mentioned, and we'll have some representatives of departments joining us to talk about how they're implementing collaborative policing. So there'll be lots to learn if you'd like to join us then, and you can find more information on that webinar at the Smart Policing Initiative website. So thank you for joining us, and once again, if you would complete the webinar evaluation that you'll receive and give us feedback on how helpful this webinar was and what future webinars you'd like to see, we would really appreciate it. So thank you, and have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.